and welcome to another tutorial. My name is Tanmay Bakshi, and this time we're going to be going over how you can use Swift in order to customize and take input from the touch bar and authenticate using Touch ID. Not using an iPhone, but instead using the new late 2016 MacBook Pros. So, to begin, now I'm very excited about this today. So, essentially, now if you haven't already heard, Apple has just released new MacBook Pros in October the 27th. In fact, I was live streaming their event. And so what happened is the new MacBook Pros have Touch ID with them. So, of course, the same feature that powers your iPhones and your iPads, where you can scan your fingerprint and unlock and use, for the App Store. For apps generally, apps can use Touch ID for, securing data, for example, and of course you can use it for Apple Pay, that type of stuff with the iPhone and iPad, has now come to the Mac, and now you can actually incorporate Touch ID in your Mac applications. Now, apart from just Touch ID, Apple has actually released an entire new feature called the Touch Bar, which is exclusive to the new MacBook Pros, at least at the time of this video. And so, essentially, this new touch bar will allow us to essentially have a dynamic function row on the top of our keyboard. And so, essentially, what Apple decided is that instead of having something like a touch screen, they wanted to have a touch keyboard, so you had a lot of customizable functionality at your fingertips. And so, today, I'm going to be showing you how we can port my TID Vault application, which is actually an application for iOS that can allow you to, of course, use your fingerprint to store data, and we're going to be porting that over to macOS so that you can, of course, store your data securely with Touch ID. And in fact, this also shows you an example of how you can use the NS touch bar in order to customize the touch bar. Alright, so now, another thing here is that, another quick note, this video was mainly supposed to be a demo of how Touch ID and the touch bar actually work, so this application isn't the most secure. It takes the data that you put into the TID Vault and stores it in a text file in your home directory. While that isn't the most secure, in the next video where I show you how to improve this application, you'll be seeing more features such as a much more secure way of storing this information. But of course, until then, let's actually get into how you can use the touch bar and Touch ID with the new MacBook Pros in order to create TID Vault for macOS. Let's get right to the Mac part now, shall we? Alright, so welcome back to the Mac part, and now just before I begin this video today, I'd like to show you a quick demo of this Mac first of all, and as well the TID Vault application in action. So before we begin the coding, I'm going to be showing you a quick demo of the application. Let's begin, shall we? So as you can see over here, we have our new MacBook Pro here with the touch bar and Touch ID right there. Of course, new keyboard, everything else. So now to begin, first of all, of course, as you can see, if I want to unlock my Mac, it allows me to use Touch ID for that. As you can see, it says unlock with Touch ID. I just put my finger over it, and it unlocks using Touch ID. Now, as you can see, this touch bar as well is very customizable. And as you can see, I have this little application running in the center here. And this application is actually our TID Vault. Now, as you can see, in the middle, we have our Unlock Vault button. But what I've also done is I've coded this in a way that we also have Unlock Vault right here on our touch bar. And so let's say we were, in the flow using this application. It was a bit more complex and we had a lot of functionality, and some of that functionality was hidden down in, menus and stuff. Well, the touch bar wants to make that accessible. And so let's just say Unlock Vault is right over there, and let's say I'm just typing and I want to click Unlock Vault. So I click Unlock Vault, and as you can see, what happens is it says that the Touch ID Vault Mac application is trying to unlock TID Vault, okay? And so, of course, it's saying you need to give your Touch ID or enter your password to allow this. So as you can see, first of all, on the touch bar it says Touch ID Vault Mac and my application logo, Touch ID to unlock TID Vault. And if I put my finger on that Touch ID sensor, it lets me right into my vault. And as you can see, we have a nice text field here where I can put in any of my information, like, credit card information, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just random information, my passwords, really whatever. This is a TID Vault test, right? And then right there, once I'm done typing at my fingertips, I have that functionality to click lock vault, and it locks that vault, and we're back into the unlock vault page. Now, if I want to unlock once more, of course I can. Just, click here, for example. And if I want, I can also use my password, my macOS password, by clicking on Use Password. And I can type in my macOS password. And as you can see, it lets me right into my Touch ID vault. Alright, so that was a quick demo of, first of all, the Touch Bar and Touch ID in action with this new MacBook Pro, and how I was able to use that with TID Vault on the new macOS and MacBook Pro. Alright, so now let's get right into how we can code in this application. Let's get to the screen recording now, shall we? Alright, so welcome back to the part where now we should start coding. So before we begin, as you can see again, I have this Touch ID Vault application open. I can click on Unlock Vault. I put my finger on the Touch ID sensor right over there, unlocks, and there we go. That is our text. Alright, so now, before we can begin more demos, let's actually take a look at the code for this application. So the way this works is just how this would work for an iOS application. It works using the local authentication framework in Swift. And so if I head back over to my Xcode view here, now let's begin with the actual storyboard, shall we? The UI. So, as you can see here, I have, just like a Mac Cocoa application. I have our window controller over here, just general window controller. I also have a view controller. This is our default view controller where I have an unlock vault button. And I also have a new view that I've created called the vault controller. Now, the vault controller essentially is the view that, it's this view over here that comes up once you have unlocked your vault and you are ready to start typing some text into it. So, next, as you can see, this was a very simple UI, and of course I've created a new class for this Vault Controller view called, well, Vault Controller. Now, another thing that I've done is, in order to actually have touch bar support, we need to actually have some functions implemented in the window controller of our views, so that it knows what to put on the touch bar. And so, in order to actually implement that, I had to create a new class for that window controller called, well, Window Controller, which inherits from NSWindowController. And as you can see, this is the function, or this is the class, okay? So this is a class called Window Controller, inherits from NSWindowController. And so, of course, we have our window.did_load function. This isn't anything we need to worry about right now. But the function that we had to implement in our project is the make touch bar function. Now, the make touch bar function essentially allows us to tell macOS that yes, we are creating a touch bar, and here is what is going to be in that touch bar. Now, of course, this has a few now the way this works is it'll return an NS touch bar, okay? And this is optional because we could or could not actually have a touch bar to use at the moment. If we return nil, then there'll just be nothing on the touch bar, just, the escape and our system controls. But if we return an NS touch bar, then in the middle there, between the escape and between those system controls, you'll have an application space where you can put in any of your objects. And so, as you can see, in our window controller, now, what we display on the touch bar depends on what view we're on, right? And so what happens is if we haven't unlocked our vault and we want to, then on our touch bar we want to say unlock vault, so we can ask the user for their fingerprint. But if we're inside of the vault and we want to lock it now, then that means that we want to click on touch bar lock vault. And so we need to change button text accordingly. And so, in the make touch bar function, what I've done is I've checked if let view controller is equal to the content view controller, self.content view controller as view controller. So what this is doing is we're saying, okay, we're taking this window's content. Self is an NS window controller, and we're taking the view content, okay, and we're checking if that view content can be made as a view controller. Now keep in mind that view controller is this view right over here, okay? This is view controller. And so if it is, then we call that view controller's make touch bar function. If it's a vault controller, then of course we still call that make touch bar function. And so inside of the ViewController class and the Vault controller class, both of those have their own functions called make touch bar. Now each one will create their own touch bar, their own customized touch bar, whatever they want to have in it. And so essentially what happens is if we call, let's say this one's make touch bar. So again, this is the make touch bar for this view over here that wants us to unlock the vault. And so as you can see in this function, we are creating a new touch bar. We're setting the delegate to self. We're setting the customization identifier to an unlock bar. I'll talk about this in just a little bit. I'm setting the default item identifiers as .UnlockButton, and I'm setting the allowed item identifiers as UnlockButton. And of course, then I'm returning the touch bar. Now, what is .UnlockBar.UnlockButton? Well, essentially what this is if I go to touchBarIdentifiers.swift over here on my side, so you can see I have an extension to the NSTouchBar item identifier class, which essentially allows me to create two new constants, the unlock button and the lock button. And so these are the two types of elements that I'm creating for my touch bar. Now again, if you had many more elements to put on your touch bar, you would have many more in these lists. Okay. Now another thing to keep in mind here is that this isn't your average sort of, hey, I'm going to create a label element, I'm going to create a button element, I'm going to create etc. etc. In this case, what you want to do is create very specific types. For example, I didn't just create button, like static let button, and then just say, okay, then in the code I set one of the button's texts to unlock button and one of the button's text to lock button. What I did is I created the unlock button and lock button as separate types. And that's what you want to do. Be very specific with each and every item that will be on your touch bar. Now after that, I've set these constants to NSTouchBar item identifier, and then I've just given it some random identifier like com.tbsstouchbar.unlockButton and then .lockButton for the lock button. Now I've also extended the NSTouchBar customization identifier class, and this allows me to create an unlock bar and a lock bar. And so essentially this tells me whether this touch bar that we're currently creating will be the one with an unlock button or a lock button. Alright, and so that essentially allows me to, of course, know what I'm currently doing with the touch bar and allow the system to know what I'm doing with the touch bar as well. So now, if I head back over here, so that's essentially what we're doing in the ViewController for make touch bar. In the Vault controller for make touch bar, we're doing the exact same thing, except instead we're giving it the lock bar, lock button, and of course, lock button once more. Now heading back to the ViewController class. Now of course the ViewController class also inherits from another class called NSTouchBarDelegate, or in this case it's a protocol, not a class, sorry. So of course from this protocol we are implementing a function called touchbar make item for identifier, which returns an NSTouchBar item, okay? And so what I'm checking here is if the identifier is a .UnlockButton, then we return an unlock button. What this means is that if the touch bar API is saying, hey, what does an unlock button look like? You told me that we're going to create an unlock button, but what does that look like? And so if it's asking for an unlock button, which in this case it most probably is, then we're going to create a new unlock button item. We're going to create a new NSButton for this unlock vault, and of course we're going to give it a selector and a target. We're going to set the unlock button items view to that button, because of course NSButton inherits from that view, and then we can return that item. And so the touch bar is then able to put essentially an NSButton onto your touch bar that you can then control, and right as you click that little button over there, it'll call that action in the selector that you put in your NSButton. Alright, and so of course if we aren't asking for unlock button, then we're going to return nil because we don't know how to do this. Alright, so next in the Vault controller, let's talk about the Vault controller's touch bar make item for identifier function. Again, exact same thing as ViewController, except instead of unlock vault, it is lock vault, and of course a different selector as well. But now, let's talk about the logic where we can actually use Touch ID to authenticate our users. So now, in order to do that, we actually need a special framework that Apple's written called local authentication. Now, of course, you can just write in import local authentication. Swift will import that automatically into your project. And of course, what we can do now is sort of also we don't exactly need this. Okay, so that was something from my older version, but never mind. So what we can do now is essentially see this unlock function here is essentially going to allow us to unlock the TID vault. So, of course, just like an iOS application, just like I've explained in my previous tutorial, which, by the way, if you haven't watched, there will be a link to in the description. That video sort of explains how you can use Touch ID with the iPhone. And the same thing over here. We're creating a new LA context, local authentication context. We're giving the reason as unlock TID vault. We're giving an authentication error currently as nil, but if it gets an authentication error, it'll put that error into this variable. And then we're checking if this context can actually actually ask the user for their Touch ID. But we're doing that by saying can evaluate policy. That checks if the user actually has Touch ID on their device. And so in this case, if they do, then it'll call another block of code, which will actually evaluate that policy and ask the user for their Touch ID. Now, another thing to note, if I command click on device owner authentication here, as you can see, there's another case here, device owner authentication with biometrics. This means that we're only going to take a biometric scan, okay? We don't want any passwords, nothing. We only want that Touch ID scan. If they get the Touch ID wrong, we're not going to let them in the vault. But if they get the Touch ID right, we'll let them in. But in this case, we're using both Touch ID and the user's system password. And this allows us to essentially say, hey, if you want to use your Touch ID, use your Touch ID. It's really convenient. But if you don't want to use your Touch ID, or you don't have that finger right now, you can, of course, use your password. Of course, though, since I wanted people to be able to use their password, I did not tell it to specify biometrics. And so, finally, once I evaluate that policy and once it gets back to me, I check if it was a success, and if it was a success and we were successfully able to authenticate that user, that yes, it is indeed the user of this Mac that we want to let into the vault, then we can perform a segue called the unlocked segue. Now let me tell you a bit more about that. So if I go to my main.storyboard, as you can see, I have a little segue here between these two views. And this segue is a sheet segue, and the identifier is unlocked segue. Okay. Now the sheet segue, essentially, now if I unlock my vault here, as you can see, it sort of just dropped down like a sheet onto this view. And so that's essentially a sheet segue. Okay. It just drops down, and then when I click on lock vault, it slides back up again, okay? And so that's essentially what that is. It's one of the simplest segues I could find to actually implement because, as you probably know, segues with Cocoa aren't exactly fun to work with. But, of course, I was able to get that working. And in order to actually dismiss this lock vault controller, you must be wondering, well, we don't have a segue from lock vault back to unlock vault. Well, actually what happens is, what I can do if I show you here, all I need to do is call self.dismiss self, and what this does, it'll just dismiss self, okay? It'll just go right back up, because this is essentially like a message view or an alert view, and it will allow us to dismiss it automatically. Alright, so apart from that, we of course have our save and load functions. These are very self-explanatory, again, mostly inherited from our iPhone application, and this will allow us to, of course, first of all, save our text that we've put in our TID vault and load text from the TID vault when the application begins. And of course, when you click lock, we call the lock function, and the lock function will automatically save what you put in the TID vault, and it'll dismiss self. And of course, in view.did.load, we will try to load in some new text, and we will tell the touch bar that, hey, now essentially what this is, that this input field, if I unlock the vault again, this input field, now, what happened is, the touch bar actually has another feature where when you start to type in text, it'll actually give you those quick type suggestions just like it does on iOS. Very convenient, but not for a TID vault. The reason being that, well, our lock vault button gets hidden due to that keyboard, those quick type suggestions. And so, of course, I told it that is automatic text completion enabled is equal to false, and this means that it will not give us those quick type suggestions so that the lock vault button can stay there and of course can be very accessible and easy to access by the user. And that is essentially a quick rundown of the code for this application. Now again, as I said, if you look in the save function, this isn't the most secure save function. But then again, today I wanted to teach you how you can use Touch ID and the NS Touch Bar in order to control these new features that the Mac has brought to us. But of course, a new feature or a new version of this video will be coming out very soon, which tells you exactly how you can, of course, improve on this and make it more secure. And of course, an actual Mac app soon maybe as well. Alright then, so of course this code will be open sourced on GitHub and the link will be down in the description for you to download and use and learn from. And if you have any more questions, suggestions, or feedback, you can leave them down in the comment section below, email them to me, or tweet them to me at TajiMani. And of course, if you really like my content and you want to see more of it, please do consider subscribing to this YouTube channel or maybe just liking the video. And if you think this video could help anyone else you know, please do consider sharing it as well. Again, once again, thank you. That's going to be it for this tutorial today. Goodbye.